just to get that going, so I know that's on. And I'm going to start to look at the Facebook Live thing now, because I know it takes a couple of minutes just to get it on here. Right, so I'm just going on, it's just loading up and everything, it just takes a little while. I just need to put some titles in. Right, so. Four. Right, so I'm going to press the button and see if we can go live then. Let's go. Yep, we're live, folks. We're live. So, okay. So, hi, my name is Kelvin Guest of Guest Wines, and I'm here to host the fourth in a series of webinars of Vinarchy in UK, featuring some of the world's finest movers and shakers in our industry today, with tonight's topic being on the subject of sustainability. We shall be featuring a live tasting of a selected wine from an English wine producer, which tonight will be from the Lemberg Winery in Gateshead. Here they shall be showing their newly released Maximilian Red. So without further ado, I have with me tonight Norway's Best Sommelier 2020, Francesco Mazzola, Bib Wines Oliver Lee, and Elise Lane from Lemberg Wines. Welcome everybody, hello. So, hi. So can we start just with maybe each of you giving a little bit of a introduction about yourselves. We'll start with Francesco, then we'll go with Oliver, and then we'll finally finish with Elise, if that's okay. So if I could go over to you guys with Francesco, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, perfect. Welcome everybody. My name is Francesco Marzola. I'm the Best Sommelier of Norway 2020 and Best Sommelier of the Nordics 2018. I'm the wine director at Park Hotel Vossevangen in Voss, which is Scandinavia's biggest and best wine cellar. To you, Oliver.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Ollie Lee. I'm one of the co-founders of the Bib Wine Company. We specialise in bag-in-box wines. All wines that we select ourselves, and we buy direct from the winemakers and bring them over to the UK and then package it up in bag-in-box because we're convinced of the merits of the format. And think it's a good way to get wines to people. And in a former life, I was in the Navy as a submariner, and that's pretty much me. I'm one of 5 co-founders, so I'm just a small part of a much bigger team. That's me.
Fantastic. And Elise?
Hi, I'm Elise Lane. I'm the founder and head winemaker at Lemberg Wine. We are an urban winery based in Gateshead up in the northeast. And we are the UK's most northerly winery. An urban winery is a winery that makes wine but buys the grapes from elsewhere. And we've so far had 2 vintages, starting off in 2018. And we buy all our grapes from English vineyards and bring them up to Gateshead and make the wines up here. We so far have made still white wine, red wine, and we've got 1 fizz that we make. And our most popular wine at the moment is the Bacchus, which is actually England's probably most popular English still wine. But today we're going to taste our first red wine.
Looking forward.
Yeah.
Well, this is what we're going to do in a moment. We're going to taste this wine. This is your Maximilian Red bottle here. I'm looking forward to trying it. And while we're trying it, if you can just maybe first at least just give it a little bit of a lowdown on the wine itself. I believe the grape variety is Regent. The a very traditional red grape variety from England. But if you could explain a bit about where the grapes come from, how the wine was made, etc., that'd be really good. So I think we should maybe pop the cork or get a screw top, I believe, which is...
Yeah, we've moved to screw cap. Our first vintage was cork, but we've moved to screw cap this year for various reasons. So yes, the grape variety Regent, or spelt Regent if it's easier for anybody. Yeah. It's a hybrid grape variety, which means that it's a cross between a European grape variety Vitis vinifera, which is what most of the grape varieties you will know are. That's the species, and it's been crossed with an American vine species, which gives it broad resistance against most fungal diseases, which is what we would have most trouble with in this country because of our climate, because of the damp kind of coolness that we can get. That can mean diseases are more prevalent, and that's really actually quite important in terms of sustainability, which we'll come to later on when we talk about vineyards and pesticide use possibly later. We're not really known for our red wines in England, but we thought given that the previous Vinarchy webinars have focused on some English sparkling, we thought we'd maybe go a little bit out there with this one and try our first red wine. The reason that we made it was because lots of customers up here in North East like, do you make a red? Do you make a red? Do you make a red? So, which is my Geordie accent, sorry. And then I was like, yes, of course we do. So let's make one. And so these grapes were grown in Herefordshire, and the vineyard is in Yark Hill in the Frome Valley, and they were grown by a lady called Beth Derbyshire, who started the furnace project down there. We just simply bought the grapes from her and made the wine. The soils, I think, around there are limestone, and the valley provides warmth, airflow, and a south-facing sunlight, and it's a bit of a microclimate, which is exactly what you need with grapes to try and get them nice and ripe. The region, or Regent, is really good for grown in a cool climate. It's originally from Germany because it has low acids and it can build higher sugar levels, which is what you need to create to turn into alcohol driven fermentation, which is really good when you have not so much sunlight and not so much warmth using during the ripening period, which is generally in this country September time. The winemaking we used, we got the grapes in, we crushed and destemmed the grapes, and we pumped them straight into a large stainless steel vat. When you make red wine, you leave the wine or the juice on the skins during fermentation. We actually didn't add yeast to this one. And it took about 8 days to turn all the sugar into alcohol. We fermented it at 25 degrees C, and to do that in the northeast, which is another part of one of my points around sustainability in the winery, we didn't actually need to cool it down to keep it at 25 degrees. It just kind of nicely stayed there because it's quite cold in our winery. During fermentation, heat is produced by the fermentation reaction. I am originally a chemist, so I was a chemist. I moved away from the northeast to study chemistry at Jesus College in Oxford, and then I was working in finance in London for quite a while before I retrained and went to Plumpton College to retrain in viticulture and enology, where I learned to make wine. So the chemistry side of it is really interesting to me. Why it is that we get all these different flavors in wines, and how you get so many different grape varieties. It's not like blueberries, but if you just made wine from blueberries, it probably all tastes the same. But all the grape varieties, it just absolutely fascinates me that, like, I've made this wine, I've made a rosé that tastes completely different. I've made a really off dry white wine before. All these different grape varieties that can give us all these different things to talk about. That's where I come from in my interest. After we finished the fermentation of the region, we we pressed it, sorry, in our hydraulic basket press, and then we aged it in used French oak barrels for about 4 months. And then we bottled it without any fining, and we didn't use any filtration. And for this particular batch, we didn't actually add any sulfate either. It was kind of an experiment to see how that would turn out. We named it Maximilian, who is my first son, that's who it's named after. And to me, I'm really pleased with it as a wine, because, as I said, England isn't known for its red wines, and I immediately get kind of cherries on the nose. I obviously know this wine quite well, having made it all through its lifetime, as it's changed, as it's progressed.
I think English red wine has come a long way in such a small space of time. I remember maybe 10 years ago tasting some red wines, and I always found them quite disappointing. They had a lot of colour, there was a lot of depth to them, but there wasn't a lot of structure. And as such, I didn't know whether there was going to be a future for English wines. But over recent years, I've become more and more impressed with what I'm tasting. And I would say here there's some decent structure going on in here, and I like this sort of some nice acidity, some sharp, that sort of sour cherry sort of fruits coming through, and a nice sort of floral on the nose. So what do you think it is, Elise, about red wine and why we're more able to produce better quality wines than we were before?
I think finding the right grape varieties was very key to being able to understand what grows best here. Particularly not trying to make things that they make in other countries just because Northern England. I think there has been obviously a bit of climate change going on, temperatures rising, but I also think that in England we've got much better at making wine. I think we understand how to make wine better. But we're better trained as winemakers, and I think we're using better techniques in order to make sure that that we can kind of make the most of the grapes. The other grape varieties that do quite well here are Pinot Noir, does really well, and I'm actually going to try some of that, to try to make some of that this year. But I really think this Regent is quite well suited, given its disease resistance, but then also the fact that it is does have that structure to it that you mentioned, Kelvin. The tannin levels are higher than you would usually get in an English wine, so I think that gives it a little bit of age worthiness that maybe we couldn't have got before.
I think the tannins work well with that acidity. They kind of balance nicely, and that freshness just gives that really nice cook through of cleansing on the palate, and making it very food friendly as well. I was thinking when I was having this, I think there's a little bit of maybe blackberry in there, a bit of smokiness from the oak. The oak is nice because it's nicely touched. It's not too overdone. I mean, for me, I was thinking of things like you could have cold meats, maybe even like a bacon sandwich, or even sort of smoky tofu and some kind of wild mushrooms or something would go with it, as going through my mind. I'm kind of impressed by what I'm tasting. So I say the same with Pinot Noir. A few years ago, I was tasting some Pinot Noirs, and I weren't sure whether they were Pinot Noir. I've had some either that were so deeply coloured that I was very suspicious that that's what they were. In other words, they were so light coloured, maybe even like a rosé, but they were passed off as a Pinot Noir himself, or quite stalky. And I taste wines, either red wines, Pinots, and I'm tasting this, and I'm thinking, wow, this is from the UK, and it's a really well-made wine. And I like what the oak is doing here. It's not too intrusive at all, and I'm liking that floral lift on the nose. I don't know about what, Oliver, you think about.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, really. I'm interested to know actually what how old the barrels are. Are they new, or are they?
They're different ages. So the oldest, I bought them all used. So the oldest one was from 2012 and the youngest one's from 2016. And I think they would have gone from the maximum time it would have been used probably about, I bought them a couple of years ago. So it'd be like maybe the maximum is used 3 times and the minimum about once. So
I think that really comes through because you don't get any kind of jarring, you know, you don't get any of those jarring spice notes that, if they're not integrated, become really difficult, and especially with a wine that's you know, relatively light. Although I'm surprised at how it pulls off. You know, it is light and it's very fresh, but it pulls off a bit of extra weight that, you know, belies it. Is it 10.5%? I mean, it doesn't necessarily drink like a 10.5% wine in some ways, but I mean that as a compliment. But I think that it adds a smokiness, but it almost, with the cherry and the sour cherry, for me comes across like a you know, the what's it called, Kirsch. You know, it really comes through like that, and it's very particular, and I've not actually come across many wines like it. And I think that's something that's really nice about English wines, is it throws up styles that, you know, when well made, are actually very different to what's come before. And I think that's what's nice about Bacchus as well. And even when we do you know, grape varieties that are done elsewhere, they come across differently. And I think it's tremendous. So, I mean, well, congratulations, I suppose, but and thank you. The only two words that come to mind. But yeah, lovely.
And how many bottles of this have you managed to produce?
It's about 3,500, 600, something like that.
Wow. So it's limited edition. So you've got to get it while you can. That's kind of what the take on this is. And I would say to anybody who wants to try this, that I think you've just got to get out there now and get ordering it, because it'll soon be gone. And it's a great summer wine as well. I think this is one that you could have slightly chilled. I'm just thinking now, sitting outside in the garden, maybe a barbecue, that sort of smokier edge to it, a little bit, something a little bit grilled on the barbecue would work well with this. The acidity would work well with anything a little bit fatty. Fantastic to sit outside. And it's just, you know, from down the road. I think that's what I like about again about the Laneburg wineries, is for me, as well as a wholesaler and doing wine tastings, that people enjoy this local story, the local winery bit. And who'd have thought we would have had an English winery so far up north and so close to ourselves. I would have thought that just a few years ago, because you know, I was always been into English wine for some time, but all my journeys were further down south. But I've known Elise since she set up, and I think it's just a really great project of endeavour to do this. But I know there's one or two other people who's having a go up here. I know a couple who's doing have got a wall vineyard in Northumberland. So pretty soon we might have Northumberland wine as well, which I'm looking forward to tasting, because I just love this pioneer spirit, and it's great when you get really good wines to go with it as well. And it's really getting local people switched on to English wine, because it's a very I think an easier gateway to get people involved when you know you can tell a story about it being very local and that kind of side, and then it gets people engaged. And to do this wine, this is your first red as well, your first attempt at doing it, it's pretty good. So well done there. So this is very enjoyable.
Thank you.
So I know, Francesco, you haven't got a bottle of this wine because customs were having difficulties getting it through, but you have had this wine before.
Yep.
Is anything that you'd like to?
Yeah, actually, I think that what's really shine through here is the limestone soil that you were mentioned before about the vineyard, because this lovely acidity, it has almost a kind of citrusy acidity in form, for example, of tangerine, this type of sour cherry that you were mentioned. So it's a really, really interesting combination of fruit profile that you have in the wine. It's really enjoyable, as you were saying. And I agree totally with you to have maybe have it slightly chilled, and it could be a really summer, lovely summer wine.
Do you have many English wines in Norway? Are they sort of a thing out there? Are people aware of them?
Yes, actually, it's a few months ago there was a big release here at the Monopoly, because we have a release each month of new wines and so on. Yeah. And there was a big focus on English wine. So we got a lot of majority, of course, are more in a way Vitis vinifera varieties like Chardonnay and Pinot Noirs, and a lot of sparkling wine. I think that per today we have listed at Monopoly around 100 English wine between stills and sparkling, more or less. Yeah.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, it's really growing. It's the market here for that, and the people are getting really aware of it and are enjoying it. Mm-hmm. So it's really growing. Yeah.
And if you want something a little bit fresher, obviously you've got now the northeast here, so it'll get to Norway far quicker. Well, when you don't,
Yeah, hopefully.
you know, than from the south of England. You know, I would always think, you know, maybe looking at something from the north of England would be worthwhile, because I'm surprised where vineyards go, because originally, you know, you're looking at clusters down south, and I know back in Roman times there was a lot in the Leicestershire area around there, but I believe that the climate was warmer, probably not dissimilar to what we're experiencing now. But it's nice to see that people are being able to make really good wines further north. But, you know, obviously in Elisa's case, it's doing a bit more of the negotiant style of doing an urban winery of buying in grapes and bringing them up. But it's a fantastic way to do that. And so this year they were from Hertfordshire. Is that right? That's what you said.
These are
Hertfordshire. And where the next batch goes, because it's not the same producer you use all the time, is it? It's
so in 2018 we got all of our grapes from Leicestershire, and then last year we got them from we got the red grapes from Herefordshire and some of the white grapes. We got our Bacchus from Gloucestershire, and then this year we are looking at Hampshire for some of them, but possibly Leicestershire again.
Okay.
So, I mean, one of the things about it is that it means we can kind of see where the best grapes are available. I mean, our reasons for not going with the same ones year on year aren't anything other than those people want to make their wine this year out of those grapes. So, like, and I mean, it would be good to have going forward something more sort of stable, but it does kind of make us fleet of foot in terms of what we want to make. We can change the varieties. Like I said, our Bacchus was really popular, so we're always going to make Bacchus. We'll always try and get that. But if there was a sudden urge by consumers to want to drink something of another style, we could do that, because we could sort of source the grapes from somewhere else. We haven't got those vineyards that are kind of stuck with the varieties that that maybe we wouldn't want to use. But I think what I really like about our model is that we're making still wines. We do make one fizz, as I said, but we use Sauvignon Blanc for that one. We did use Sauvignon Blanc, and that's another hybrid one. And I kind of like that idea of like using the different varieties for still wines, and not necessarily always going down the champagne variety.
Hello.
Having some wine with her.
Sorry.
Sorry. You definitely should have some of this.
It's the only way to ensure you can get a glass without it all going.
Yeah, before I drink it all.
But I also, I mean, you know, and from just opening your wine, I mean, you've been referring to your Bacchus. I know you just released your latest one, but the one last year actually won some awards, got noticed in Decanter, didn't it? And I think that kind of gave a pretty good start to getting everything off the ground, and I think a very good lift to do that. And it was really good Bacchus as well, because it is one of the great varieties where I do believe it has a potential to it, but it can be sometimes. I'm a bit sort of, with some of it, it can be a little bit too overdone, too flowery, too perfumed. And I thought yours had this kind of like nice delicacy about it, and a freshness that was balanced. And it was really good to see that you got this sort of really sort of good lift to begin with this Bacchus. So is the Bacchus that you got this year, is it on a similar par with tasting, or is it any different in profile, do you think?
It's quite similar this year actually to last year. The 2019 is quite similar. It's interesting because the grapes came from a different vineyard, but probably had, even though they were from a different part of England, had a similar kind of terroir. So it's similar soil, similar kind of aspect and that kind of thing. And it's got slightly less residual sugar and it's got less alcohol, but it doesn't necessarily, like, it doesn't have less weight. Well, it's not a weighty wine anyway, but it doesn't have less weight to it. But I think the less residual sugar kind of means that, I mean, somebody had tasted it the other day and said it had grown up. So I kind of see that as like a good thing as a descriptor for someone who's tasted both vintages, to say it had grown up. So it's not necessarily like completely different because we use the same winemaking techniques, but it's like evolving to something more. So that's quite pleasing.
And that's good, because I think what I liked as well about your last one is sometimes I find a fault with English wines. It's not a fault as such, but it's maybe just it's a niggle with me. Is sometimes you notice the residual sugar in there. It's obviously trying to balance the sugar and the acidity, and it both can sometimes be a little bit disjointed and not quite there. And I think with the Bacchus that I had from your last vintage was just it just worked. You didn't notice either. They both worked seamlessly. And I've not tried your latest vintage yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I think
I know you need to try it. Yeah.
I will do. I mean, I enjoy this now. This is good. It's opening up as I get it in the glass. I'll have to save a bit as well for Ruth when she comes. If there's any after her, hopefully there will be after me. Otherwise, it'll be in the bad books. But it's really nice. I think what I'm liking about it as well, as it's opening up, I'm getting more of that kind of perfume on the nose, and the oak is just there. It's just subtle. It's not overpowering it. I'm quite fussy about oaky wines. And really, I get annoyed with wines that are just too big. And usually they're kind of the New World ones that does it. And I know sometimes in England they've overdone it, and maybe it's just trying to readdress other issues that's going on with the wine. But this is really nice. So well done there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I definitely think sometimes oak can overpower the other flavours that come through. Maybe if you've used a little bit too much new oak, and you get the sweetness from it, and that certainly wasn't what we were trying to go for with this one.
And have you, Oliver, got any English bag-in-the-box wines?
We do actually. So the last 2 years we've collaborated with Three Choirs, and we've done a blend with them, which has been great. And I mean, from my point of view, seeing our head of wine, who is a winemaker as well, collaborate with their director of wine over the blend. And I mean, I was part of it, but largely I was the audience. As this wine sort of miraculously appeared in front of me, and it was just an amazing experience, really. And I suppose that must give you at least so much flexibility to be able to play around with grapes from different places and vinifying them separately, and sort of working out how you can blend as you go forward. Because that's what I found amazing. Wine made from same variety, 2 different locations within the same vineyard. Basically vineyards that could see each other, it's pretty much the same terroir, slightly different aspects, slightly different picking date, and being able to play around with different tanks that have come from very similar sources. Also wine that had come from down the road that had been made under contract, and that had a totally different aspect again. So playing around with those sorts of things was very good fun. But we've been very fortunate with our Bacchus. It's done really nicely, and I'm also relatively happy with it. Very happy with it, actually. But I love it, and we're keen to have more. And obviously, when you're championing a format, there's quite a lot of work involved in that. But we, right from the start, didn't want to be afraid of having wines that we wanted to have for their own sake, even if they weren't varieties or areas or appellations that would naturally sell themselves. So we've had English wine, and it in itself wouldn't always have sold itself. Actually, it's I think it's quite a good thing to have in your stable English wine, because people find it really interesting, and it's super engaging, and for an English audience, it's pretty good. But we've had Blau Frankish and Zweigelts and Gruners and things like that. We don't want to have only Côte d'Or and Malbecs, and give, we have those if the wine's good enough, of course, but we're keen to play around and experiment. And English wine, I think, will always be a part of that.
I think that's a really interesting point, because we, in our first vintage, we made a Pinot Gris. I call it Pinot G, and it's a lovely, lovely wine. It's much drier than the Bacchus, and it's got a slightly higher acidity because of it being that kind of traditional grape variety that wouldn't necessarily ripen as well in this country. And it does make a lovely wine, and it's very popular, but most of the time when we do tastings, somebody will beeline for that one because they recognise the name of the grape variety. And then they'll maybe taste the Bacchus afterwards and go, oh, but they wouldn't have gone for that one first because they don't recognise the name of it. And sometimes I'm sometimes a bit like, oh, you were just about to buy that Pinot and then you've gone for the Bacchus because you preferred it. But that's fine with me, as long as they're buying our wine, I'm happy. But it is a very interesting point that people would go for that thing that they know. And I mean, that's what everybody does, isn't it? I mean, I've been a wine lover for a long time, so I'm quite adventurous with my wine choices, because I've studied it and I've done qualifications, and I've just had an interest. But for what I really want to do with our kind of stuff is for people who they're really interested in wine and they do, but they haven't got that background in doing lots of wine tastings. Maybe it's too intimidating to do lots of wine tastings, or maybe it's just I haven't had time. Maybe I'm just very into what I have been drinking, but now I'm interested in finding out more. That's what I like to bring, is that, like, oh look, why don't you try this one? You wouldn't have ever heard of it, but I'm sure you're going to love it. That kind of thing is great, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. I think you can't expect people to take a massive punt all the time.
No.
And that's the tough thing. So it's how do you start selling things? And tasting is the only way. But at the end of the day, you can't have it available to taste everywhere and at any one time. So it is tricky. Although I think Bacchus is starting to grow a bit of its own sort of cachet, isn't it? It's definitely our leading. Outside of sparkling wines, it's our leading variety and the one that gets the most press. And I think everyone wants to include a Bacchus in most sort of summer wine articles or English wine articles. So it's got that going for it, and it does. I think it's something that responds incredibly well. I mean, no one else can make it Bacchus nicely, really. It came from Germany, but it never did very well there. So it's quite nice that we've got something that does do well here. That's almost our own in a way. So
it is, because Bacchus is a wonderful grape variety in the fact that the flavours will still develop even if you've had a poorer growing season. So if you haven't had the level of sun you need, it actually performs almost better than if you had too much sun, because it can get, like we were talking about, those kind of residual sugar levels can end up too high. So it obviously depends on how much on the fermentation, but you still get those wonderful fruit flavours even if it has been a kind of a colder growing season. And I think that's why it's so well suited to our climate. And I think we should be like playing to our strengths as in English wine, as opposed to trying to almost copy other wine regions, really.
And that's a good question, because I know I've just seen one of the comments on the Facebook Live there was a person asking about whether we're kind of going to emulate other wine regions, like say with our Pinot Noir to Burgundy and such like. I mean, what do you think on that? I mean, but me personally, I think it's about us trying to develop our own identity. But what do we think about kind of comparing our wines to other countries?
Well, I think obviously the classic example of that is that we compare our traditional method English sparkling to champagne all the time, and that's because the terroir is similar, the climate has caught up with it, and the limestone and the chalk is similar. I think other than that, I think we're much better off just trying to create our own identity with our own grape varieties that work well here. Yes, we can get some wonderful Pinot Noirs, but we're never going to make it exactly like Burgundy. That's a sort of a different kettle of fish completely. I'm not saying it can't be as good as that. Of course it can, but I think that we just need to do our own thing. But then I'm a bit of a rebel. I've got an urban winery in Gateshead, for goodness sake.
I agree. I think it's about creating our own identity. We might use similar grapes here and there, but I just think it's about us carving out our own niche and going with that. Because if you try and just copy somebody else, one you're always having to compare it against it, and I think you're never gonna create something that's individual about your own. It's always almost like you're trying to make a cheaper copy or a carbon copy of something rather than being real. And I'm up for something being really just an English taste. When I taste an English Pinot Noir, it's got a nice lightness, a fruitiness, and I think that's what it's about. And some of them are getting more serious as we go on. The English sparkling ones, some of them do err towards that kind of more champagne style, but I think a lot of them have got this more fruit, lovely crisp acidity in there, and I don't think we should shy away from that side, and particularly with varieties like this as well. It's not about shying away, and I think what we're talking about as well, looking at the bag in the box backers, it's allowed us to have this innovation, this freedom to explore and do things, and we shouldn't. I personally don't think we should pigeonhole ourselves too much into little corners too soon. It's great that we can innovate, and I think this is what I like about the pioneering spirit of doing these English wines, that we just can go, right, let's go for it, see what happens, let's do this, let's do that, and not be too worried about we've got to regulate ourselves more and do this. It'll come in time. As we go along, we'll find things that will work and what doesn't work, and we'll discover those. But to try and impose rules that we're not sure whether those rules are the right ones at the moment, it just seems a bit, well, is that the right thing when we've got all this chance now to have a go and exploring what we've actually got, what we could actually do and where we can go. And I just think it's a fantastic way to make wines, and seeing where we've come in 20 years, it's just fantastic. And I don't think we should try and stop that happening, because it's great. And so, things of having Bacchus in a box wine is fantastic. And at these formats, we should still be exploring and not saying, oh, we can't do that because it's not what we want to do and what we want to achieve. I don't think it's a way to go for me personally.
I think what's nice is there's a lot you gain by being a new producer, relatively speaking. You get a producing area or country, you get a lot of freedom that isn't afforded to other areas that are sort of pinned down by tradition, pinned down by what the market wants as well, and what the market expects at least. And I think you definitely see that with sparkling wines. I mean, I think there's probably a process you go through where you almost try and copy and get as close to as possible the benchmark. And once you can do it, then you start to spread your wings and see what else you can do. And I think we've been through that and very quickly moved on to finding out when we got close to that style, what was different. And once we were at the same level, and then go, well, let's celebrate that. And I think you immediately see people doing things that you can't do elsewhere. Very, very good and sparkling wines with different varieties, and then also when using those same varieties, championing Pinot Meunier and things like that, which you don't find in championing. Obviously, they use an awful lot of it, but they don't champion it in the same way. Even though it's tremendously important to the wine they make, it's almost something that they hide and don't shout about. And whereas you've got
here in England with
doing pots and pots, have that incredible 100% Meunier, which is great. So I think that's something that we have, which is really fun, the ability to champion our own style, and the difference in the way varieties react to our terroir and environment. So yeah, it's great fun.
May I say something?
I was just thinking, Francesco, just before we move on to our next subject, I was curious just to ask you, on your opinion on this, because
exactly.
You've mentioned that there's quite a few English wines in Norway now, but what was your take on the English wines and where we're going and what we're doing? And
I think it's very interesting, or what you all said, and I actually have to agree a bit in a way with all of you, in a way. I find, as you said, of course, a sparkling wine as maybe the most known style that you got right now, and as you said, someone is similar to champagne and some other are different style. But I think actually it's really interesting what you are doing, for example, Elise, with the hybrids and so on, because if you see the wine world is changing, and you see regions like Bordeaux starting to use hybrids like Lirola and so on. So in 20 years, in 30 years, in 40 years, hybrids will have more and more space in the wine world, and you have actually an advantage in England because you're using them already. So from my point of view, that I'm not in England and that in a way I have to consider to buy English wine for my list. I would rather maybe be more curious about those hybrids, those more in a way unique wines that you can produce more than, of course, you do produce a lovely Pinot Noirs, you do produce lovely Chardonnay, but when as well the price point, because of course the cost it's much higher than maybe other countries, the price point goes closer to Burgundy, then it's also natural to, for example, compare it to Burgundy or to California or to Australia, for example. So my take is actually I believe more in those hybrid, like the Regent, like the Bacchus and the Cheval Blanc and so on. That might be more interesting to be the space in a way of the place of England in the wine world.
I mean, this was a question I've got listed down here on the sustainability. Was on looking at hybrids because it's something I'd be interested in, because I know in England at the moment there is a bit of a fad towards going for the champagne varieties, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, which is fine. But we've also got a lot of these hybrid varieties as well, which get shunned and sometimes, you know, rightly so, because some of the wines traditionally that were made from them were okay. They were maybe more hobbyist than they were of a finer wine. But some of these varieties can make very good wines, and I'm just thinking that some of these varieties now are quite old. Some of the vines have been planted alongside, they're well established. They're disease resistant, a lot of them, and you know, so that they don't need as many sprays, you know, as herbicides, pesticides. So I was thinking, well, is it worthwhile exploring these varieties a little bit more, particularly with regards to sustainability? That, you know, we're looking at things where you don't need as many chemical sprays, and equally that if you do tend to these vines and look after some of these varieties, they do very well. Like the Regent's done very well, and I believe there's a variety in, I think is it the Languedoc, and they do the it's the Artiban, I think it's called, and I think it's got Regent as one of its parents, its heritage in there, and it's making some really good wines. And so this is something that, well, we might as well ask it now, but and just as possibly to Elise in mind as well, do you think that some of these hybrids that we should be preserving a little bit and taking a bit more care of, rather than sort of deciding, oh, we need to grub them all up now, get rid of them all, and let's just go for Pinot Noir Meuniers, let's get some Chardonnays in there, maybe even a bit of Riesling, or try something like, you know, something that's just sort of more common names that we know, but maybe not always the right great varieties for over here. Do you think some of these hybrids have still got a chance?
I think if we pick the right ones, then yeah, definitely. I certainly wouldn't want people to start growing things like Riesling, and because the acids are too high, and people will just struggle with the wines. They won't make good wines. They'll make I think that's the main thing as a wine producer over here, is that you want to make quality wine that can stand up to other wines. You don't just want to make, oh, well, it's nice for an English wine. You want to make nice wine full stop. So we have to have the right grape varieties for that. And obviously winemaking techniques can be used to create good wines in that way. But I mean, personally, I don't want to do things like de-acidify if I need. I mean, I haven't had to so far, and I don't like those interventions. I kind of like to not have to intervene too much. So, not having to intervene too much would mean having a grape variety that's suited to our climate.
And I mean, I'm up for more exploring this, because I think sometimes they got a bit of a bad name, and I do think some of them now, if you do treat them well, it's a bit like, I suppose, when I look at things like Carignan and great varieties that were just used for bulking up wines, or known for being vigorous. They made lots of tannins and they weren't very good. But when they're treated well, you can make some excellent wines. And drinking this wine tonight and thinking, well, this is from a hybrid variety. It tastes very, very nice. It's really, I think, representative of a very decent English red. So really, to get rid of all these other vineyards, these are great varieties, and maybe it just would be a bit of our loss to do that. And but it's I suppose nurturing it to make sure that we select the right ones and not just carry on with some of the ones that were a bit nondescript, but also planting varieties that we know probably won't do so well, but the name sounds good on the bottle, like Riesling, for instance. Yeah, so it's nice to hear that, because I think for me personally, I think some of these varieties do well, and they make some good wines. I've had blends, particularly white blends of some of the old varieties, and they make excellent wines. And just thinking, if we don't have to put all these chemicals on the actual vines themselves is fantastic as well, particularly in an environment that we're in at the moment. You know, it's very sort of wet. We know that it's damp. There's also fungal diseases, things like that. It would be a shame to lose some of these varieties that are more resistant to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does anybody have more questions for Elise before we move on? And I'll just check Facebook Live just to see if anybody else is people. Not at the moment. No, we're okay.
Well, actually, I do have a question about the Maximilian, the red one, the Regent, to Elise. Since it was your first time doing it, how did you find it work with a grape when it comes to produce wine compared to the other grapes that you worked with before?
It was actually quite a nice one to work with. Previously, I hadn't done any red wine in my current winery. I'd done them previous job, and we'd used Rondo and Dornfelder and Pinot Noir. And I think this one was probably easier to work with, and it's probably for that reason that it in some ways it's better suited. It's got more structure to it. But yeah, I found it like quite a nice one to work with. Yeah.
Is it all? I take it. Is it all? Is it a single variety? Or have you used any blending components in there as well?
It's actually single variety. Yeah.
And do you do that with your Bacchus as well? I'm just really interested because obviously there's quite a lot of Bacchus out there that has, you know, 3%. I mean, we had 3%. Gosh, what did we use? I think it was I can never pronounce it. Reichensteiner.
Reichensteiner, yeah.
It was you know, and which brought something really important to that particular year. And I think we were probably talking about the 2018. And that, you know, one thing about Bacchus is do you think it's going to struggle if we keep on getting years like 2018? Because although everyone talked about the bumper year and how the best ever English wine year, but actually for Bacchus, my understanding, it was quite a difficult balancing act trying to work out the picking date because of the acid ripeness balance. That's
really interesting because we got our Bacchus from Leicestershire that year, so right. it was fine. So we'll just grow it further north.
Yeah, but I said the Bacchus might do better over the years. It might do better and better further north, and then we'll have they probably have to have some more traditional varieties coming up from the south if we get more and more years like 2018.
Yeah, well, I think the worry about it is though that it. And it always has been with the English climate, is it does kind of go up and down. It's not the same every year. We do get that kind of one on, one off kind of thing going on. And that would be really difficult if you've got varieties that only work in the hot years. So we kind of have to adapt to that a bit. And like, that is the thing. It's the work that goes on in the vineyard in terms of leaf stripping if necessary, or not leaf stripping in terms of when we pick and that kind of stuff. But because the other worry about, because that's why it's climate change, not just global warming, isn't it? Because we get like the late frosts, which are very bad for some of those kind of grape varieties that budburst is early. If we get a frost, we got frosts in May this year. That's terrible for those. We need and some of these kind of Germanic varieties have later bud bursts, and therefore we can avoid that. And then if we start getting these like torrential downpours and things like that, that's very bad for disease, for the funguses, for the mildews and things. So in some ways, even if we do have these years with very high levels of sunlight and heat, we still have to be really careful to mitigate the risks of those other things that climate change brings to us.
Yeah. How much do you affect, in a way, the grapes that you are going to use, like in the vineyard? How much are you involved in that?
Not a great deal. My whole kind of thing about this is that if you grow grapes and you have a vineyard, that you're an expert in that, and that's what you do. And I talk quite closely with those people, the grape growers, about what they're doing to understand if they do know what they're talking about, and I look at the wines that have been made from their grapes before to see if the good wines have been made. But it's like a level of trust. So as soon as you know that person knows what they're doing in terms of tending to their vineyard, just let them get on with it. I tell them what I want to get out of with the grapes, like what sugar levels, what acid levels, that kind of thing. and we keep an eye on it. But mainly it's just that kind of trust that someone's an expert in doing that, and I'm the winemaker. That's a different skill set. Therefore, we can work together, but I don't have to influence it too much. I think if you kind of try and influence the farmer too much, it's not fair on their skills, and also it's a bit overbearing, and they might feel a bit pressured. And actually, just let them do how they know what their job is. Let them do their job. That's kind of my philosophy anyway. If someone's good at something, let them do their job.
And so on that as well.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like, you've got a good working partnership there with your growers. And I think we've already started to touch on the subject of sustainability here. So maybe we could lead straight into that now and get into the second part of this evening. Maybe my first question was with sustainability. As an industry, do we think we're actually doing enough? Are we actually doing something real? Because it's a buzzword, isn't it? You can use it, green credentials, we're doing all this. But are we really doing enough at the moment in our industry?
I mean, I think that's a really tough question, because it's not an industry that is particularly well organised as a single entity, is it? That's what makes it really tricky. And to say how well are we doing? Well, I mean, there's a huge amount of interest within different players within wine about sustainability. And I think there's an awful lot of soul searching that happens in the wine industry about whether we're doing enough. And often I think it's not always fair, because it's not fair to look at winemakers and especially leaning towards the vineyard and then the winemaking side to say, well, within viticulture and viniculture, they own a certain part of the process, but it's not necessarily fair for them to have to champion a format, which is what we're all about. And there's an awful lot of work involved in marketing a wine, and if you then have to tack onto that marketing another format and take a punt on that format and say it's going to sell, and that could be a half bottle or a magnum, but in the case of my thinking sustainability, it tends to be alternative formats. That's too much work for them to take on. So there are people that do it as a passion project, but I think it's going to come from startups and people that have got a business idea and want to make up the running. And I think it'll be specialists that do it. And I've already been amazed, but all pretty much every winemaker that we've approached has been super keen about the idea. And we've had no barriers, whatever the class and quality of the wine we've wanted to put into our boxes. We've never had anyone, where the wine's met our standard, we've never then had them say no. So, there's an awful lot of support coming from winemakers. There's an awful lot of support that comes from journalists. It's something that I think people want to talk about, alternative formats, the benefits and the environmental side. So we're definitely not doing enough. But I think it's too easy to start spraying blame around. I think the market has been burnt by other formats, and there's a job to be done to for people to promote them. And the vast majority of the industry really is made up of winemakers and growers, and then merchants on the back end of that. And you can't. I suppose in your position, Kevin, you can't suddenly one day decide that you want to turn everything around and become a specialist, because you've got business to protect already. So actually, it comes down to people in our shoes to promote the format, and to do that, we think the only real way you can do it is by getting the best possible wines you can into the format, so that people understand that it's not for bad wine. And actually, we've had no resistance from our community, our customers, and the people that we get to taste and buy our wines on the format. They've only found positives in it. So I think it will happen as well.
I agree. I think it's a kind of a lengthy process. I think for myself as a wholesaler, you're having to look at your wine list, look at who makes the wines, how the wines are made, is it provenance there? Can you kind of sell this to your customer? Can you actually explain to your customer where this wine's come from, how it was made, what's gone into it, that kind of stuff? then it's all there's a whole new realm then of packaging. How things are packaged from the bottle to cardboard boxes to things being wrapped in cellophane. You know, I get things from suppliers and it's all wrapped in plastic. And then there's the inflatable plastic that goes in it, and then the other side is transportation. There's all these things you're having to look at and see how you can develop these and make these more sustainable in themselves. And it is this long process because you've got to work together, you've got to ask other people, you've got to see what's going on, you've got to look down the chain of how things are working, or your bigger suppliers, how they work and trying to involve that, and also the individual producers, if you can have that relationship with them. And I don't know how it is as well, Francesco, in the hotels and restaurant side. I mean, I can imagine there's a lot of waste or packaging or whatever you've got there. So what's happening there?
Well, actually, I noticed that at least in Europe and California, for example, there is a quite big change in packaging, at least for the restaurant markets. I get more and more cardboard box packages instead of a wood case, for example. So that's such at least a step. And here in Norway, it's quite important, the sustainability topic. And you can see with the monopoly is working quite hard to get wine in more environmental friendly packaging. So, for example, it's launching now. It's requesting the majority of the wine that sells most at the monopoly to come, for example, in a recyclable bottles or in boxes, even in tin boxes that you can then recycle, because it's very huge, of course, you're recycling in Norway. So I think it's going forward, but as you correctly, Oliver, said, we are not doing enough, and there's much more to do.
I mean, at the moment now, there's the bag in the box, there's canned wines, there's, I believe, paper bottles, there's flat bottles. There's a lot of stuff going on now of innovation. I mean, I suppose keg wines as well is another option that people are looking at. I mean, obviously in a restaurant, what do you think is appealing to customers? What do you think customers kind of would prefer to have?
I mean, I think that when you go to a restaurant, at least in the style of restaurant I work and so on, you you do expect a bottle, to put it like that. Yeah. So it might be a bit more difficult other type of format for me, but I see a possibility, for example, to exploit alternative style of bottle, as we spoke about, paper or even recyclable plastic in a way. Or of course, it could be as you correctly as you said, in a way key. Okay, like wine could be also a possibility for the future for the restaurant business.
I mean, most people. Go on. Sorry.
Yes, sir. At least for places working with in a way with quantity or having a huge turnover of wine. So yeah.
Okay. And most people perceive glass as environmentally friendly, as recyclable, but I believe, from figures, probably less than half of it actually gets recycled again, and which and I suppose the energy that goes into it is also that side of it. Well, is that really having a beneficial impact on the environment, whereas alternative packaging might be more resourceful, and I suppose it's how we change people's perceptions. Would that depend on different countries? I don't know. Oliver, do you find there's different perceptions on bag in the box from different countries?
I mean, I think there are perceptions, but they're just perceptions of what was last done. Yeah. And actually, there's a very I think the UK customer is very canny, and actually there's a bit of a clean slate here, because it's been a while since there were any notable volumes of bag-in-box wines coming through this country. So people remember it, people understand the idea, and actually when you say, well, do you remember that idea? And they say yes, and you say, well, what if you could have good wines? They're like, well, that would be amazing, because it's a great format. Yeah. And you're up and running, and you say, well, take a look at these boxes and maybe have a taste. And they're like, well, that's perfect. And what about the environmental side? And you say, well, okay, it's 10 times, the most recent study had it as 10 times lower in carbon footprint, which is huge. And what I find interesting about the glass recycling is that the reference bottle in that study that was done, and the most recent study was the Alco study, which is a monopoly, the Finnish monopoly. And I think the previous study, which was going back some time, I think was called the Nordic study, and that was the biggest. I think it was 2012 or 2010, and a lot of that data is still being used because it's a very big study. And this is, these are being sponsored by monopolies that don't have any skin in the game necessarily, and that's why there'd be no point me or When in Rome or any of the other bag and box companies sponsoring a study of our own, because it'd be so untrustworthy. No one would think it was real. But the reference bottle in that Alco study was made up of 83% recycled glass.
Right.
But the recycling is part of the issue. You're not saying, well, hang on a second, we can improve that because we can recycle it. No, every time you recycle it, you're still adding to that same problem. Right. And what I think the example that is being set by Scandinavian countries as a whole is, well, if you find a more environmentally friendly format, and then it has an issue, and in this case, slightly harder to recycle plastics than normal, then you find a way of improving the recycling system to be able to cope with it. And here we're much further behind with that because it's council by council as to what they'll accept. And that's our real sort of battle, actually. And the major win last year for us, and I'm being a bit me-centric here, which I apologise for. But last year, the big win for everyone in the same sort of business as us was the bag now be accepted by major supermarkets in their recycling schemes. And the number of councils, I'm sure, could keep on growing because it's not just bag and box that uses film-based plastics. There's lots of them, and the technology is there to recycle it. So it's just about streaming it into the right places. So I think there's a lot to learn. And then in terms of going back to the original point and the perception, I think it's a fairly much more of a blank canvas than one might think. But it doesn't mean that there's a ready market. So I do think it'll be specialists pushing it, and up until there's a critical mass where the customer starts to demand it. So that Joe Fattorini was quite interesting recently, pointing out that in Sweden they have this concept of flight shaming, and he thinks that soon we'll have we could have something like bottle shaming, which I think is probably kind of realistic actually in years to come. But that doesn't mean there's any actual shame in selling wines by the bottle now. I mean, if you've got a wine that's particularly good, you package it in the best way to make it look at its absolute best for the market that you're given. And we think we can do that in a different way, but everyone's going to do it the way they think they can do it best. And I think it's unfair to say it's wrong, but as the market itself develops a desire to have more environmentally friendly products, I think we'll all follow suit. And that's why I think we're probably headed in not too long a period of time, actually.
Okay, and Elise, is this something that you've looked into or would look into, different packaging for your wines?
It is. We've looked into it a lot, actually. So the reason that we went with bottles originally was twofold. One was actually, well, the main one was just because we were a new thing, and the idea that we were an urban winery up north was quite novelty to begin with. To try and hit customers with a different new thing about wine at the same time, I felt maybe was a stretch too far. I don't know if that was right or wrong. I mean, that was totally how I felt in 2018 when we started off, that maybe, and that's why I picked some of the grape varieties we did, because I tried to make the wines accessible as well, even if they hadn't recognized the grape variety like Bacchus. If you were to say, oh, Bacchus is quite similar to Sauvignon Blanc, then people will go for it because they're like, oh, I like that. But similarly, putting it in a bottle meant that it was recognizable, being able to put the labels on and things in that way. But I've thought about and looked at bag and box, just bags, cans, lots of things like that. And the main bit, and have absolutely I have intentions to go in that way in the future. But the main reason was, it was actually quite a financial reason. Being a new business, we bought a bottling machine, so we put our wines in bottles. We don't want to. We didn't have the money to invest in other ways of doing things. And I mean, yes, we could have kind of paid a canning line to do it, but to be honest with you, when you're running your own business, and this is the problem with some of the sustainability issues, sometimes other things get in the way, like just not having enough time when you've started your own business to kind of think about it. And that sounds like an excuse, and I think that's where you come back to like the question of, do we do enough? I think probably, like, I mean, I studied sustainability and winemaking when I was at Plumpton College. So that was already kind of in my head. So I have quite a lot of things in place in the winery that I think are reasonably sustainable for a small winery like us. It's probably not perfect, but on the budget that we had and that kind of side of it, we went that way. And so, for example, we use lightweight bottles. So our bottles are 380 grams, and I think the average is somewhere closer to 500 or 600. So we're trying in that. And again, that sounds like, I'm just paying lip service to it. But that was what I went for immediately, was to do lightweight bottles. I've never had any heavier bottles other than our fizzes in a heavier bottle, but that's in the lightest fizz bottle. That one's 835 grams. So, well, you can get some fizz bottles that are over 1 kilo, and that's like without any of the liquid in it. So, and yeah, I think like that is one of the things that, like, yes, we don't do enough, but also we probably don't canvas enough in terms of finding out what people are doing. Yes, there are kind of voluntary things like calculate your own carbon footprint and things like that. And our industry body WineGB are doing a lot at the moment to try and find out what people are doing. And I think probably it focused a lot more on vineyards at first.
Is this WineGB sustainability project?
Yeah, so WineGB, the industry body, are doing a lot. They've got a sustainability group, and it at first was a lot focused on the kind of vine growing, so like keeping your soils healthy and not using too much pesticide and reducing your carbon footprint within the vineyard. But they've kind of opened that out now into wineries as well. So there is that side of it which is really visible. So if I said, oh well, our wines are in bag and box, that's which they're not, but if they were, that's a very visible thing that we would be doing in our winery. But behind there, we're also doing things like kind of reducing the wastewater that we produce. It's kind of that thing where you, like, as a business, we should, and I will, be produce an impact statement. So in our impact statement, like our sustainability thing would be in there, and that would be like, yeah, reducing the wastewater, like reusing our water that we've washed tanks out with lightly, because you could use it again for something else, because it doesn't need clean water to do that. We don't have any drains in our winery. We collect the water, which actually forces us to stop wasting it. So like, well, if it's collected by someone, we have to pay for it to be collected as opposed to it being put down the drain. The main thing about so you've got on the one hand, you've got waste in the water, but on the other hand, you've got that idea of the water's contaminated with organic compounds just from the grape. It's just grape juice that's contaminating it. It's not anything or waste yeast. It's natural stuff. But if that gets into the waterways, that upsets the natural balance of the rivers, causes eutrophication, that kind of thing, kills the fish off and stuff. Very big impacts we could have. So we have to kind of be very wary of reducing that. And I'm not sure how many wineries do or don't know about that. And I think that's where we need to increase people's knowledge of that kind of thing. And going back to kind of the packaging side, and Kelvin, when you were talking about use of plastic, often when you're trying to choose a courier, and this actually goes back to having glass bottles, because glass bottles can break when they're couriered around. Couriers, some of them won't accept packages that aren't airbags. They won't have it. They'll only have airbags. They won't have it in cardboard boxes. And what we've done is picked a courier that has a liquid only line, and it doesn't go on conveyor belts. So we use cardboard entirely, but then we do have glass. So it's an interesting thing, because then you've got things like just keeping your equipment up to speed, so keeping it maintained so that it's not using more electricity than it should be. And then I'm going back to the fact that we're based in the northeast again, but like we don't use our cooling system quite as much, because for example, when we do cold stabilization on the wines, our wines get so cold in the tanks over the winter months that they cold stabilize themselves, which as a technical term, that is if you've ever had a white, well, it happens in all wines, but you'll notice it more in a white wine or a rosé wine where you end up with the tartrate crystals in the bottom. It's because some of the acid has precipitated out at a low temperature if you've put the wine in the fridge. So as winemakers, what we usually do is bring the temperature of the wine down to get that out. Now, if you use like equipment, either heat exchanger or just cooling system, do that, obviously using electricity. So, you know, these are the little things that being based in the northeast help with. Obviously, we're freezing cold in there, but our wines, we've got less electricity usage. And I think that's the thing. There's like quite a lot of hidden things within the industry that people probably are doing, but we don't shout about it. And I'd love to do more, and I will definitely be doing more going forward in that sense.
And I think that you've kind of led on to my next question, was about wineries and being sustainable.
Sorry.
No, that's fantastic. No, you've led wonderfully into that, because you can see a lot of wines. One of my things I see is there's these sustainable wineries, but often these wineries are created by people with a lot of wealth to have achieved these kind of wineries where it's always fantastic, it's all sustainable, it's all gravity fed, blah blah blah. But it's cost millions to do it. And so my question was, well, as a small urban winery on a smaller budget, is the sustainability, is it actually feasible? I mean, you've answered some of it. You've obviously, some of the things there, and some of the northeast climate also helps as well. But is there things that you think that you still can achieve, or do you think it is a thing of cost to
I think there are costs. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's always the case with wineries. There's a high upfront cost. There's a lot of money that has to go into equipment to set up a winery. And if you have an added extra cost to make sure that it's sustainable. But that's very similar to your house in a way, isn't it? If you invest in insulation, your electricity bills will be lower going forward. So if you have got the ability to kind of access funds to do that, and I think, you know, the government's going some way in being able to give people grants for stuff like that. I mean, I don't know exactly what's available to wineries, but we would probably be thinking about moving premises at some point, because, you know, we've got a maximum capacity at our current premises. And certainly when I'm thinking about where we move to, I would be thinking about what I saw when I visited the Douro when I was at Plumpton, when I was studying climate change. And they put their wineries into the side of the riverbank, and they do use gravity. And yes, they're spending millions on it. But if I think about, well, let's think about the banks of the River Tyne. Are there any older buildings that are there that have that ability to be able to give that gravity? So we have a mezzanine kind of level going in. The grapes can come in, and instead of using pumps, we can just allow gravity to bring the juice or the must from the winemaker, the press, or the crusher destemmer down into the tanks like they do. I mean, that's what they're doing in Spain a lot, because they have those frontier towns that had a lot of tunnels underneath the little villages, and they're able to just naturally do that. So my thing would be probably to try and find some premises that could naturally fit into that without having to kind of spend a lot of money building something that did that, because there is a kind of a financial barrier, and it probably, unfortunately, would be something that would be the thing that would go, which is very sad for a lot of people who don't have that kind of funding. Like you say, we're not millionaires, so
we're going to have wine on the Tyne instead of fog on the Tyne. Quite good. I kind of like the idea of seeing maybe put a few vines up there on the banks of the Tyne. That'd be fantastic to see. But yeah, I think this is always sort of the barriers that we have to look at to see, well, how do you achieve these aims? But it's great to see that we're already thinking of ideas and see what some of the challenges are for us to overcome. And as we're getting better at, I suppose, talking to one another in our different areas of the industry, it's great. And now Wine GB itself has got its own sustainability a committee or group. It then helps us then to be able to talk further and to see what these problems are or challenges and where we can get funding to help us to move forward. I think that's kind of what we've got to be able to do. I'm realising time's gone on a little bit over, just past the hour with it. I just want to know if you guys have got any more questions or anything you want to ask on sustainability, because I mean I've got others that I'd like to ask, but I think we don't want to just go on and on, which would be nice. I think we could talk all evening, drink more of this wine. But have you got any more questions, any of you guys? I'll just check the Facebook feed as well. We're all right on there. Everybody's seems to be content drinking wine. I mean, for yourself, I suppose, just put it to you guys, obviously, Francesco in the hospitality, just see where, what do you think are the next steps forward for you guys for your customers and in Norway? I mean, I don't know if the clientele have got different opinions on where to go or what you've got to achieve or what they perceive you've got to be doing.
I mean, since we were talking about before, for example, bag-in-box and so on, it's quite big here in Norway. A lot of people drink it. But as Oliver said before, if I catch it correct, it's a format that maybe has been misused in the beginning and is a misconcept. So from an hospitality point of view, what might be a bit complicated to use the format in the hospitality is the concept that the clientele has of it, about the content. But I mean, I believe that it will come the day where one really well-known high-end producer will start to use the format, and that will start a change completely in the concept of the format and then also in hospitality. So. Of course, we are also looking forward to like for example, if you have a possibility, try to have a naturally cold cellar, so then you can try to avoid to use electricity to cool it down a bit like you do, Elisa. Fortunately, we're in Norway, so it's actually a bit more possible to keep it cold than warm, and so on. So it's
I mean, that sounds good, because I mean it's good to hear what's already been achieved and what's the plans forward. And for you, Oliver, what do you think? Particularly in the UK, what do we need to be doing over here to have a step forward in looking at our packaging and?
I mean, I think it's mainly education, and I think that process is really already happening because, as I said before, I think in terms of media and press and journalism, there's a huge, hugely sort of receptive atmosphere when it comes to alternative packaging. So I think that's there, and I think it's just that it's going to take a little bit of time, and there will be people that sort of push back, and it'll just be able to get about getting over some hurdles. But I think it could be. And I think it could be still for in Elise's position, it could have been crazy to have tried to do it in bag-in-box, on your first year, because there were some extra hurdles attached to it. You reduce the longevity of the wine in the packaging format, so the pressure to sell it through in a certain amount of time is higher. In your first year, when you don't have a sort of ready market, would increase the pressure a lot. And if you have to contract it out, then the problem we have in the UK is a lot of the contract filling lines for bag-in-box are designed for huge volumes of pretty poor quality bulk wine, traditionally. And you'd have to be really on them in terms of quality assurance and quality control, and make sure you have someone there at every step of the way, really keeping control of that. But you get huge losses as well. So from a small producer's point of view, it's not really acceptable if you're doing small quantities, which, and we're in the same position in terms of quantity as Elise. So, that's why we do it in a cellar in a winery in a sort of semi-automatic, semi-manual basis. and you can keep control of those aspects. But I think it's all about the markets and about actually the market is ready, so people will, like us, will bring the format with different and different formats as well. And I don't think we've seen them all. Cans and bag and box. They're definitely the biggest ones that are in the running. But I'm sure there'll be more to come. And it's, there will be more and more people with interesting, cool business plans and ways of putting it forward, and that'll happen. And then when the market then is developed, then there'll be more mobile. We have mobile bottlers, but we don't really have a huge number of mobile bag and box fillers. I mean, they do exist in the south of France and in Italy, but I don't know that that's hugely available in the UK. But that sort of thing becomes easier and cheaper, and then all of a sudden, actually, everyone can do it. And at that point, which talking further down the road, it does become a sort of conscious decision. Why am I choosing this over that? And the market will actually be pushing people in a different direction. So right now, I think you have to create the market, and that's about education. And to educate people, my personal point of view is you have to prove to them that it's good wine, that it isn't just for bad wine, and that's the first thing to do. And then it'll be influencers that follow, really sort of trend, talk about hospitality. It's a huge ask to say, you've been doing it this way with your classic service, why don't you change it completely and rewrite all of your menus? But then you get a really cool restaurant which has awesome wine, and they say, well, awesome food and great wines, and they say, well, actually, this allows us to have all of our wine by the glass, so why wouldn't we do it? Because we love the wines. And their customers love it because it's a bit edgy, and their customers are all quite environmentally friendly. And all of a sudden, those sorts of establishments become influencers of themselves. So I think the more education we have, the more adoption there will be. And I'm not just talking about bag and box, because there are other things out there. And we're all playing our parts, and whether it's actually the part in the winery, which is 7, according to most quoted studies, is I think 17% of the carbon footprint of an average of wine's journey, or the vineyard, which is 15, I think. Everyone's doing their own bit, and in the vineyard you've got control of trellising, which is something like 14% of the direct carbon footprint of the viticulture process, and just because of the machinery that's often used. So if you go about life in the vineyard in a different way, you can really have a huge impact on the part that you own. So I think it's everyone playing their different part and just educating each other about what they're doing, I think is key. And if everyone's doing their best, you make good business out of it. And in the end, that's what will control it.
I do agree with you. I mean, for me as a wholesaler, it's something that we're seriously looking into, the different kinds of packaging, and it is about the education and how you sell it to your customers. Some customers are very, say, edgy, switched on, want to do things, want to do something different in different formats. And I think the most important thing is what the contents are like inside. If you've got some decent quality contents inside, it's easier to persuade people, and then they can look at the cost. And particularly at the moment with the COVID situation, where people are really looking at their margins and wants to look at how they can improve their cash flow, looking at alternative packaging that not only is environmentally better, but also could save them some money as well, is an attractive option now to begin to explore further than maybe what we were doing prior to all this. And so it's almost like created a gateway in, particularly for me as a wholesaler, to say, right, let's look at other sorts of packaging. We could save you some money, you're still going to get some good wines, and you could improve your margins in these difficult times.
Yeah, I think everyone, all the formats playing their own role is really fun, because actually in that future you can still see a place for a bottle of wine that looks really lovely, and you lay down for a few years, because well, until we've proven it, no one's going to be laying down boxes or cans of wine for that purpose. And it's nice that you have different formats for different occasions. The can brings a unique ability to do a sort of a single or double serve and to be taken somewhere, and is small. And being small means that you can try something without such a large commitment. And a box, you get to have a glass and then not worry about finishing that box and come back to it a week later and then carry on. And it's ultimate flexibility at home and great for picnics if there's lots of people. All of these things bring their own aspects, and I think it, in a way, it'd be sad to lose the bottle completely. But I think we need. I suspect we'll end up losing it mostly. And I think that would be a good thing. But I think the soul searching we do is quite interesting, and I think it's sometimes it's unfair because it's not, the onus shouldn't be on people that can't really make the running, as it were.
Yeah.
But I'm just really interested because I think it's the change is really, it's 4 or 5 years of interesting articles on the subject, but now I think we're really seeing people that's fed into people's mindsets, and people are starting to look around and see what's out there, and I think it'll start to speed up now.
No, I agree, and it's all about that innovation side, and I think that rounds things up quite nicely on that kind of point that we've, it's about that creativity, people wanting to look at different changes better for the lifestyle, better for them, better for the finances as well. Could I just thank you all for being here tonight? It's been a very interesting chat. Thank you, Elise, for your wonderful wine.
Thank you.
And we shall be hopefully drinking more of that. If we want more of your wine, we can get it from yourself, or you can get it from me at Guest Wines as well. With the Vinarchy series, this was the last in the present series of the English wine Vinarchy in the UK, but we are going to do more Vinarchy programs. If you want to catch up with us, then you can do on www.mywinelife.nl/Vinarchy, or at guestwines.com, where you can sign up to our newsletter and we'll keep you informed of what's going on. Thank you for everybody who's watched. If you've not been able to watch it live, then you can catch it on our Vinarchy YouTube channel as well. So it's there for you all to see over time. But thank you, everybody, and cheers for watching, and cheers for now. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much.